Shakespeare is meant to be performed. That is how it was written. That is how it is meant to be seen and heard.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Keep It Fictional, a book podcast for book lovers by book lovers from the Port Moody Public Library. So some of you folks remember that my favorite book of 2024 was this book called Private Rights, which was a sapphic retelling of King Lear set in a Britain ravaged by climate disaster. The storm from the original play manifested in never-ending rains and tensions built among the three sisters as they were reconciling with life in a drowned world. So as everyone here knows, I absolutely loved this book. It was the best book that I read last year. It happened to be published in 2024, which is great. But not only did I love it because it was written by one of my new favorite authors, Julia Armfield, it wasn't just because it made all of King Lear's three daughters lesbians. That was a perk, but it wasn't the whole reason I really fell in love with this book. I really loved it because it took my favorite Shakespeare play and created a new and engaging story that hit all the beats of the original work without necessarily copying it scene by scene, but it made the original work relatable and more engaging for contemporary audiences. So reading and falling in love with this book, Private Rights, got me thinking about reimaginings of Shakespeare and reimaginings of other literary classics. So that's what we will be sharing with you today. I'm your host, Emma. I'm joined by my book friends Sadie, Corrine, and Virginia. And for today's episode, each of us has read a retelling of a literary classic. Some of them are Shakespeare, some of them are other literary classics. And I'm especially interested in discussing why pop culture is so obsessed with retellings in general. Retellings of mythology are immensely popular right now. And so many Shakespeare plays and literary classics have been turned into like hit teen comedy movies. Things like She's the Man, which is one of mine and Sadie's favorites. 10 Things I Hate About You, incredible. The movie Clueless. So I'm hoping today we can get a little bit of insight into why we find retelling so fascinating and what really makes a retelling great. So today we're actually going to start with Corrine. And before we get started, I want to know, what is your favorite Shakespeare play?
Okay, well, I'm going to go like very, very basic with the first kind of Shakespeare play that really spoke to me, which was Hamlet, because at its essence, Hamlet is a murder mystery. And so that really like appeals to the mystery lover in me. I love the plot of it. I love the characters of it. I was obsessed with like Ophelia's character and the imagery in it. I just really love that play. And so for this theme, I also did a Shakespeare retelling, mostly because, again, I rather misread the brief, but I got there anyways. So I think we can agree that comedy is a very subjective, personal thing. So when I was kind of a teenager, South Park and Jackass were like all the rage, and I did not have a single ha while watching them. Some people now think Ted Lasso is a great comedy, Emma and I included, and some people find it cloying and overdone. Social mores change. Jokes that were hilarious 10 years ago kind of fall flat and don't hit anymore. So can a 400-year-old comedy be funny? Shakespeare's comedies can be trying. Some of them are funny and have jokes that still hit. I would argue that Benedict and Beatrice's banter in Much Ado About Nothing is still as relevant and fresh and funny as it was when it was first penned. The Merchant of Venice is not funny at all. And I'm always curious as to why it ends up in that category. Midsummer's Dream has moments, and then it also has moments. Arguably one of the most problematic comedies that still has relevance today is The Taming of the Shrew. Now, Emma mentioned 10 Things I Hate About You, which is perhaps the best teen comedy ever made. I will fight you. But imagining this story for a modern audience often leaves us with a bit of an uncomfortable feeling in the pit of our stomach. Katerina is the headstrong heroine who gets married to Petruchio, who essentially tortures her into being a submissive, biddable bride. For modern audiences, this is a lot to swallow. And in fact, there's controversy as to whether the play is misogynist at its core or whether it depends on the interpretation. Is Shakespeare trying to be edgy and funny and push the boundaries, or does he really just believe that ladies need to get their hands crushed? Hard to say. So any reimagining of this particular play has to grapple with that central issue. Is this a feminist tale or is this a misogynist tale? If you're Anne Tyler, you just sidestep the issue completely. No worries. So Random House decided to do kind of what was called like a marketing stunt at this time, where they asked a bunch of authors, including Anne Tyler, Margaret Atwood, to reimagine Shakespeare classics. And so Anne Tyler was given the assignment of The Taming of the Shrew. Anne Tyler is probably most famous for Digging Our Way to China, The Accidental Tourist, Spool of Blue Threads. And when she was kind of given this assignment, she read through the play and was like, I got to tone them both down. They're both screaming at each other from the go. It's too much. So I kind of have to like rein them in a little bit. She imagines this story in a time period that I actually could not nail down while reading it. It feels simultaneously like the 1950s and only one person has a cell phone. So I don't know when this is happening. I'm going to say the modern age. And it is about Kate Batista. She is the 29-year-old daughter of Dr. Louis Batista, who works as a researcher at Johns Hopkins University. Kate was kicked out of university for calling her professor's description of photosynthesis half-assed. And so now she's kind of just staying at home, helping take care of her much younger sister, Bunny, and working at a preschool with children that she does not enjoy and is only there because her aunt pulled a couple of strings. Kate is blunt, strong-willed, not exactly a fun hang. And she's getting in a lot of trouble at preschool because of her approach to soft parenting. I think my favorite scene is when the head of the daycare calls her in and is like, so a parent has a complaint. So one of the little girls asked, who do you think is the best drawer in the class? Kate looks around and is like, yeah, I think Jason. Jason is definitely the best drawer in the class. And apparently this upset the little child. Kate doesn't understand why. Jason is objectively the better drawer. She should learn how to deal with disappointment. No one pays Kate much mind. She feels a little bit aimless and lost in life. Her mother passed away, and so she has de facto become the mother of the house, despite her not really wanting to be the mother of the house. But because she doesn't have much else to do, that is what she is resigned to. Until one day when her Dr. Dad invites her to come and drop off a lunch. He never does that. If he forgets his lunch, he can buy his own lunch. However, he is insistent that she come down to his office. When she does, she meets his lab assistant, Pyotr. Now, dear sweet Pyotr is from Russia, and would you know it, they are on the verge of a scientific breakthrough. They've been working together for 3 years, and they are really going to make a big medical change. Unfortunately, his visa is about to run out. And despite trying to put in an application to renew it, that has been rejected. So, what's a Dr. Dad to do? Well, you convince your daughter to marry this guy for visa reasons. I do actually really love this kind of modern interpretation of an arranged marriage. Pyotr is to just say a broad Slavic stereotype. However, he seems entirely charmed by Kate and her forthrightness. He doesn't quite understand why her dad treats her like a servant and is in fact like, move to my place, have a rose garden. And this follows the ups and downs of their romance until their eventual marriage and what comes after. It is a story of stolen mice, of horrible weddings, and love. So this is, I think, a very charming book, mostly because of Anne Tyler's writing. Does the plot work? Does it work as a reimagining of Taming of the Shrew? If you think about the romance for 2 seconds, does it kind of fall apart? Mhm. When I finished this book, again, I was kind of delighted. I think it would make an amazing romantic comedy movie. I think it would really, really work on that. It's very funny. The characters are lovely. Her younger sister, Bunny, is absolutely horrible, and I loved it. Kate is a very interesting character. Again, I think that she's kind of written as neurodivergent without it ever saying that. And so that was really interested in her trying to kind of like find her way in a family that doesn't really understand her. It really does work very hard to reconcile marrying a total stranger just to get an apartment instead of just, like saving your money and putting it down. There are options for you. You don't necessarily have to marry a total stranger, even though he's got broad shoulders. Like, there are options. When I went along looking for kind of like reviews of this story to see if my like general pleasantness, but kind of not sure whether it really tackled the play was accurate, I found a wonderful article from The Guardian. It's a review by Viv Grosskopf. And the headline was Vinegar Girl by Ann Tyler Review. Skilled but pointless Shakespeare retreat. This update of The Taming of the Shrew is enjoyable, but never manages to convince that it's more than a mere marketing exercise. Incredible stuff. I didn't mind it. It was perfectly pleasant. Do I feel like it really tried to understand the play or take the play apart or take it in a new direction? No, but I think that it tried to stay true to the roots that this is at its core supposed to be a comedy. It is supposed to be funny, even though we as modern audiences are like, oh, it is, we are supposed to laugh. And in this book, I did laugh. I did enjoy myself. And when I closed the book, I did feel happy. And isn't that what comedy's supposed to do?
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Corinne. I agree with you. I think 10 Things I Hate About You is, like, above all else, the best teen movie ever. Like, I have a personal attachment to She's the Man, but 10 Things I Hate About You is objectively better. And that's a hill I will die on. So glad we can at least agree on that. What a fun little comedy that sounded like a romp. Thank you so much for sharing it today. Next, we're going to shift over to Virginia. So I have to ask, what is your favorite Shakespeare play, Virginia?
Of the very few that I have read, that have been read in school, I don't know if I have like a favorite, so to speak, but I'm going to say Macbeth, I guess. Who doesn't like a person trying to wash blood off their hands? I don't really have a favorite. The other one was Julius Caesar, just because of my Latin roots. But other than that, I don't really have favorites, so to speak. For my retelling today, my book took inspiration and it retold, and it also provided quite a lot of commentary on the original novel, which is called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, the only complete novel written by Edgar Allan Poe. And the book, the retelling, is called Pym, and it is by Matt Johnson. Poe probably doesn't need any introduction, and I'm going to confess that I did not read the original novel. I thought about it, I borrowed it, I planned to do it, but then I'm like, my retelling actually integrated a really, really good summary of Poe's novel within the plot. And so I was like, I think I'm good. Also, life short. We have too many good books to read. And given that both of these books are kind of about adventures at sea, something that I really don't care about, I don't think I need to read two both books. So I just did one. But as I said, thanks to Matt Johnson, I feel like I kind of got what Poe's novel is about. It's a story of Arthur Gordon Pym, who wants to go on a boat, goes on an adventure at sea, and his buddy Augustus happens to work on a boat. So he hired Pym as a stowaway, and he said to Pym, I'll let you out in a few days when we're in the middle of the ocean when there's nothing they could do about it. But Pym's food started running out, and Augustus didn't show up because it turns out that there was mutiny on board. The slaves that worked below deck have decided to revolt. They managed to stop it, and then there was shipwreck, and then apparently there's cannibalism, which for a few seconds made me want to pick up the book, maybe. And then they were saved by some other crew, and then they traveled farther down south towards the South Pole, and they came upon a tribe that took them captive, and it was described by Poe as being so black that even the teeth were black. And Arthur and the rest of them, of course, tried to escape. And in the end, only he and another slave named Dirk Peters survive. And that was kind of the story. It was and then has a weird, ambiguous ending that involves some giant white creature. Anyway, fast forward to Matt Johnson Retelling. We met Chris Janes, who had just got fired from his job. He's a university professor, and the reason he was given why he was fired is because he was supposedly hired to teach African American literature, but he insists on doing mostly American literature. But the real reason Chris knows why he got fired is because he refuses to sit on the diversity committee. Being the only Black professor on faculty, they need him to legitimize the committee. And he doesn't want to play along because he knows that the committee has no power to do anything and he wants nothing to do with it. And he's sure that's the reason why they deny him tenure. Not only did they fire him, they also didn't give him a chance to clear his office, to pack up his stuff. They just went in and took everything and dumped them all in front of his apartment. So when he got home, there was just pile of his stuff completely soaked because, of course, it has rained that day. And so all his rare books, all his collectibles, everything is ruined. His buddy was there and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, man. Like, this is just so bad. But, I have something that may cheer you up a little bit. And so he pulled out a book that he was hoping to sell to Chris. He told him that, oh, yeah, this book is supposed to be a diary by a slave, which is kind of Chris's academic interest. But it's not necessarily like a super rare item. Like Chris has quite a few of those. However, what caught Chris's eye is the name of the author, because the title of this diary is The True and Interesting Narrative of Dirk Peters. This is supposedly the Dirk Peters that Chris is super familiar about, the other survivor in Edgar Allan Poe's novel. Now, Poe's novels is framed in a way like many books that is like, oh, someone is entrusting the author with his story, or the author found like a manuscript and now here's the story that he's publishing. So it's kind of like that, and it's always been read as fiction. But now Chris may have evidence, and since then he has done some research and actually found some descendants of Dirk Peters to verify that indeed Dirk Peters is a real person, which means that Arthur Gordon Pym is also real. That means Edgar Allan Poe actually know these two people and has actually taken their real story, their true story, and published it as fiction. And if this is true, that means somewhere near the South Pole, there is a group of Black people that have never been known to the rest of the world, that have never been colonized, and as Chris described it, has been uncorrupted by whiteness. And now suddenly Chris has a new motivation. He is going to get on a boat and to find this group. And so the rest of the book is about his adventure that Chris took along with an all-Black crew and what he saw and what he found along the way. So as you can see, Matt Johnson went beyond just the retelling. The original book by Poe was the inspiration for the protagonist's voyage, and then the protagonist ends up taking a similar path as the original main character in Poe's novel. Chris in the book is a literature professor, and he believes that to get to the roots of today's racism, you really have to look at the works of these white giants that have really shaped our thinking for centuries. And why is it that Poe is still relevant today, despite what some of all the other characters in the book say? It's because of that. How we have been told for so long by all these writers that white equals good, that white equals superior. And this is the same kind of criticism, in fact, that Toni Morrison actually made in a collection of essays about Edgar Allan Poe. For her, she said that Poe basically equates whiteness with perfection. And so looking at all the characters that are Black in the works by white Americans, Morrison writes, quote, that no early American writer is more important to the concept of American Africanism than Poe, because of that focus that he has about white being perfect. And so Matt Johnson took that and really explored that in this book. All the associations, all the connotations that are so embedded and so ingrained in books, in our thinking about the different races, how this idea of whiteness and Blackness and how those colors, what they symbolize, what they have come to symbolize, is all taught to us and have just been like told to us over and over again in these books in the different depictions of people of races. And so we'll make this book a great read during this Black History Month to really kind of look at how Matt Johnson kind of explored this idea. And I'm so glad that I remember this book in time, because I was kind of halfway through another retelling already, and I had a couple of other books just in case. And then for whatever reason, I just remember, oh yeah, like I read Invisible Things by Matt Johnson, a speculative fiction that he wrote a while back, and I really like it. So I remember looking up what else he has written and came upon this, and well, that sounds like interesting. And it's just thank goodness that I remember this. Perfect for the episode. You know, he writes with such humor and just such great satire, such great social commentary, and he has such an engaging storytelling style that makes a bold novel tolerable for me. So I encourage you to pick up Pimp by Matt Johnson for a really creative retelling. Really take a look at the original work and do something with it. And also maybe a book for this Black History Month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Virginia. Kind of serendipitous that you found a book that was like such a perfect retelling, but also timely, given that it's Black History Month right now. So that was really nice. I think we'll transition to our existential question before our last two books. So today, the existential question is kind of a two-parter. What makes a good retelling, and why do stories keep getting retold?
Think like what makes a really good retelling and why they're so appealing is that mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar, like the new and novel, and then something that you already know. So sometimes when you like approach a story or a movie that you haven't seen before, there's that kind of sense of like anxiety because you don't know where the story is going to go. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the end game is. But if you do a retelling of something that you're familiar with, you have a sense of where that story is going. So you can kind of let go of that tension in that at the end of She's All That, you know, they're getting together and everything's going to be fine. And you know the kind of like beats that the story is going to hit as it goes along. Like that skeleton is there, and then they can just reflesh it with new and interesting things. Like they can do something of like changing the setting for it, or they can change the characters a little bit, but we're familiar enough with the beat. It's like a remix of a song that you know, or a cover of a song that you know. You already know the song, so you can appreciate the artistry that goes into the subtle changes around it.
Yeah, and that was something that really worked with Private Rights as a retelling, is like, because I know King Lear so well, I was like, okay, I know that like at some point all hell is going to break loose, chaos is going to happen, people are probably going to start dying, somebody's eyes are going to get gouged out. Like the whole book, I was waiting for something like that to happen, but it was so slow in the tension building. But that like if it wasn't an adaptation of King Lear, if you weren't familiar with King Lear, you might think that the story isn't really going anywhere, that like it just keeps raining, it just keeps flooding, everything is kind of building and building, but where is it heading? But because I know King Lear, I'm like, people are going to die and chaos is going to hit, and I was just like waiting for so like I think it kept me engaged, and it kept me like I was anticipating something big happening at the end throughout it. So it kind of took the skeleton of King Lear, but added those like contemporary bits. Like it made it a story about climate change. It made it a story about, it was originally a story about complex sister relationships, but it put it in a more contemporary setting. What do you guys think, Sadie and Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Corinne. Like it's that familiarity that kind of helps you like to guide you through it, and it kind of sets you up for it. I think that it can be fun to shift that as well. And I think that kind of is where the fun of a retelling is that wondering, okay, is it going to be the same? Are they going to change any like major players in this? And either the frustration that comes from that choice that has been made or not. I just think about one of the most well-known Romeo and Juliet retellings, West Side Story, where they don't die in the end, or one of them doesn't die, or something like they change quite a drastic. They make a very drastic change at the end of it. And so I think that can be the fun of a retelling as well, is like, how are you going to change it? How are you going to shift it so that it might be more relevant to today's society, to today's kind of world? And so I think that's what's a lot of fun about retellings. And I think, yeah, people like the familiar. People like to see the recognizable things within their media. And I think that's why stories keep getting retold, because people enjoy that familiarity. They enjoy being able to watch something like, oh, I know that, I recognize that, I know those characters, and kind of see how it gets shifted and how it gets turned on its head.
It's interesting because all the things you mentioned are probably the reason why I don't really gravitate towards retelling, despite reading a really good one for today. It's like someone has already spoiled the book for you. I don't like, nah, like it doesn't, like I don't want to spend my time reading it knowing, oh yeah, this is going to happen. Or like, it's not interesting to me. I want to know that is unfamiliar. I want to know that it's different. So I think that probably what makes them not exciting for me. It's kind of like when you mention cover songs. I think that's kind of thing. Like I know my husband always thinks that like a cover song that pretty much exactly the same, very faithful for the original. Like he appreciates the skills that it takes to recreate it. And sure, but like for me, I'm just like, well, what's the point? I just listen to the original. Like, why do I need to listen to it? So what I want to see is I want to see someone put like a really, really good spin on it, like that I can recognize, okay, it's still this unique thing that you have done to the song and you added value to it. You made it like something that is your own and original. The one that I think I keep thinking of is, if you haven't heard of it, Disturbed, which is a heavy metal band that does The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel and is excellent. It is so good because it really highlights the meaning of the song so much better in my thinking. But like I think that's what I prefer if I was to read a retelling. It has to do something different. It has to tell something different. So I think sometimes for me, if I were to read it, I would like probably the kinds that maybe take like a minor character and tell it from their point of view perhaps, just so that I feel like it offers something different, a different perspective. There has to be something more for me to be interested in it.
Yeah, I like what you said about cover songs, Virginia. Typically, for a cover of a song, I really like one that is vastly different from the original. Although one of my favorite covers is Landslide by the Dixie Chicks, which like isn't too different from the Fleetwood Mac version, but there's something about adding like more of the country instruments that really do it for me. But I'm curious to know, especially because Virginia brought up that sometimes retellings are frustrating if they don't do enough that's different, if they don't change it enough to make it a new story. How do you folks feel about the fact, like I have a frustration with this, the fact that instead of like TV shows coming up with new ideas and new concepts, people just keep retelling the same stories over and over again. Like people do live action reboots of animated shows. They're like coming up with some new Harry Potter reboot that they're bringing back. Like, how do you folks feel about those types of retellings where instead of coming up with new concepts, people are just kind of revisiting the same stories, but not, in my opinion, not changing a whole lot from the original?
It's really tough when someone has done it perfectly the first time. I'm thinking of like Colin Firth, Jennifer L., Pride and Prejudice, the like 5-hour miniseries. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And it's a very faithful rendition of the novel itself. And so I know the Keira Knightley one, like, it's fine, but I still harbor this resentment of like, why? Couldn't you just leave it alone? Like, it's fine by itself. It doesn't need anything more. And I think that kind of, here we're going to go. The hubris of it, of like something that was made maybe a little bit longer ago could never be as good as something that was made right now. And I think that's kind of like the frustration of like, as Virginia said, if you're not going to bring something new to it, if you're not going to redo it, if you're not going to tell it from a different point of view or bring something else, if you're just faithfully adapting what is already there, it does speak to kind of like the disdain that studios have for people, that they won't be able to watch something that's like 10 years older, that it just needs to be redone with new actors. Like that's the key to it. Oh, if we just throw some new hot faces in it, people will go and see it because they know what it is and we'll just make a ton of cash. Like it feels like a cash grab in that sense. I do think it's interesting when they do it for different mediums. One of my favorite manga is Cherry Magic. They did the live action, which is flawless and there is nothing wrong with it and it is perfect. And then they made an anime and I was like, but do we have to? Could we just leave it?
That might be the only instance I've heard of them doing the live action first and then the anime. Because typically what I like, the Cowboy Bebop live action was unnecessary. I have heard the One Piece one was good, but I still haven't watched it. I have personal problems with the Avatar: The Last Airbender live action, but we won't get into that today. Any other hot takes about retellings that we want to share today? Karine looks angry.
we can take our conversation about Avatar: The Last Airbender live action remake elsewhere. Again, the original is perfect. Leave it alone. It doesn't need it.
So I don't mind them, like Corinne said, I don't mind them taking into different formats because it's very different. It's not like you're just making another movie of another movie. Because I mean, Emma, come on, don't you want to see live action Haikyuu? I would love to see a live action musical Haikyuu. Come on.
But like, if they did it with like volleyball players, like real volleyball players.
Come on, you know it exists, and I would love to see it. Like the Prince of Tennis, like live act, like I would love to see that musical. But yeah, and also like the Spirited Away musical is actually excellent. It is so good. I was so skeptical of it, and then like somebody was just like, "You need to go watch it." So I'm like, "No, I don't." Like, what is this? But yeah, like it's excellent. I was so impressed. So I think there is in a different format because it's so different, right? You're making like from like an anime to like a live action. Like I think that there's skills involved in making that. Like how do you make those things happen? Like so yeah. How do you do Prince of Ten? How do you do Haikyuu in the musical? Come on, Emma. You know you want to watch it. So yes. So I think there's some retelling. I think the other thing also is like I also like the kind of ones that if you're gonna do remake it like. Because original something horrible happened, like in the book that I read, right? The original was just awful in many ways, and so like make fun of it, like do something about it, and not just retell the whole thing, like with like you said with different people. So
I never expected the Haikyuu musical to make it into the podcast today.
I think there needs to be purpose. Like I think kind of similar to what Virginia and Karine are saying, like don't just remake it for the sake of remaking it and for the sake of getting more money from it. Like, does there really need to be an updated, as much as I love her, Rainbow Bright? Probably not. The one from the 80s is gold and should never be changed. But if there's reason to update it and kind of say something through your adaptation and say something through your update and remake of it, then I think that there's definitely a point to it and need for it. I think that the Percy Jackson musical probably didn't need to happen, but that's just my own personal thoughts. Harry Potter also probably didn't need to be a musical, but that's just the way it goes.
And Bob the Builder does not need to look like a man.
But the She-Ra remake, I really, really liked. I did. I can't help it. I did.
That one was great. I liked it.
No. The original all the way. Nope. You ruin it. Ruin the She-Ra. Nope.
But it had something to say. Like, regardless of whether you liked it or I did like that they did try to do something with it. Like, as you said, like they're playing with it. They're playing with the concept of it. And sometimes like they go too far and you're like, this is so far towards what I know to be the original and I know to be like my canon that sometimes you just cannot accept. But I did like they tried something.
I have to admit, I've never seen the original. I've only seen the Netflix She-Ra, but I loved it.
Well, yeah, of course. How old are you again, Emma?
Thank you folks so much for sharing your hot takes. I love an existential question that turns into an argument. It's my favorite type. We can transition over to my book for today. So I have a literary retelling, not necessarily a Shakespeare retelling. But before I start, I do have to share that my favorite Shakespeare play is King Lear. Everybody knows I love eye gouging. Everybody knows I love complex sister relationships. So what is there not to love about King Lear? And I do really appreciate the representation we have for the tragedies here. My favorite Shakespeare plays all tend to be the tragedies. So it's nice to see that we've got Hamlet and Macbeth. We love tragedy. We love the darkness and the murder and all that good stuff. So my book for today is a retelling of the classic vampire novel Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, which I read for our vampires episode last year. So if you'd like to learn more about the original predatory lesbian, then you can check out that episode. Or you could just read Carmilla. It's only like 120 pages. So if you have an evening to yourself, go ahead and read that. It's a lovely little story. Just a refresher of the plot, it is the original vampire story. It actually predates Dracula by about 26 years. And it's about a young woman named Laura who lives in an isolated mansion in Austria with her father. A carriage accident happens outside of her home and brings the mysterious and beautiful Carmilla into her life. Carmilla is graceful, she's elegant, she's stunningly beautiful, but she's also very secretive and erratic, and she's definitely a little bit weird. So, after spending a lot of time with Carmilla, Laura starts experiencing these strange symptoms of illness, as well as hallucinations and nightmares. And local girls are also starting to die mysteriously. And Laura eventually learns that all of these incidents, her nightmares, her hallucinations, the girls' deaths, are all connected to Carmilla, and Carmilla is actually a vampire. So the book is never explicitly queer, but it is steeped in sexual tension between Laura and Carmilla and just kind of steeped in this gothic romance. And this retelling of Carmilla that I read for today is outright gay. It takes all of that original kind of queer subtext of the original story and makes it more explicit. So this book I have today is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. And I was actually lucky enough to get an ARC of this book last fall from NetGalley. It'll be out February 13th. So next week-ish. I don't know how that lines up with the release date of this episode, but it'll be out just in time for Valentine's Day. So if you want to read a bloody lesbian vampire romance, spend your Valentine's Day reading Hungerstone. So this book takes place about 20 or so years after the original Carmilla. It's at the height of the Industrial Revolution, but instead of in Austria, we have now found our titular vampire in the moors of Victorian England. And we start with our narrator, whose name is Lenore. She's a woman in a stagnant and transactional marriage. It's devoid of any passion or romance. And her entire existence is committed to maintaining her husband's society standing. She has her own backstory of familial tragedy. She witnessed her parents' death in a carriage accident when she was young, and she was mostly raised by her emotionally abusive spinster aunt after that, which kind of left her world very narrow and very lonely. Lenore is the wife of Henry. He's a new money, up and coming steel magnate who whisks her away to repair his newly purchased, dilapidated mansion and transform it before he hosts a hunting party for potential investors. So Lenore, without much else to do or say about it, kind of glumly accepts her fate. She moves with her husband out of London to the imposing Nethersham Manor in the countryside, where Henry goes to run his steelworks during the day, and Lenore is left to oversee all of the repairs and party preparations of this mansion, which is an impossible task that she's pretty much guaranteed to fail. All of this planning, all of these preparations are sort of derailed when Lenore and Henry encounter a carriage accident on their way from Sheffield to Nethersham Manor. So we're kind of hitting the same beats as the original Carmilla. There's a carriage accident right outside the big manor. And in this carriage, they discover alone a chillingly beautiful woman who needs a place to stay while she recovers from her injuries. A mysterious woman with no family, no belongings, no story, and obviously her name is Carmilla. So they invite Carmilla into their home. Amateur mistake for anyone who knows anything about vampire literature. And with Henry distracted with his company, Lenore is left kind of on her own, caring for Carmilla by herself. So as they spend more time together, the two women become increasingly closer, despite Lenore's sort of apprehensions about Carmilla's strangeness. She's kind of similar to the original Carmilla. She's rude. She has no sense of etiquette. She's very opinionated, very loud. She's vulgar, and she's fiercely independent. Kind of all of these things that Lenore was taught not to be or is too afraid to be herself. But Lenore can't help but feel drawn to Carmilla. She feels this like indescribable yearning to be close to her and defend her when she and Henry kind of get in these arguments. Henry is really offended by Carmilla's brashness, and Lenore can't help but be really frustrated by Carmilla, but also want to defend her, want to kind of protect her honor. So Lenore's world shifts with Carmilla's arrival. Her presence awakens this long suppressed yearning in Lenore for freedom and for passion, both things that are noticeably missing in her marriage, and a yearning that sort of toes the line between fear and desire. And as her desire grows, Lenore begins to question the confining role that she has endured in her marriage for so long. So as a retelling, this book kind of hits the same beats as Carmilla. You have the original carriage accident that brings Carmilla into their lives. You've got this lonely woman in an isolated manor. Although this time the woman is married, in the original story, Laura is a single woman living with her father. So Carmilla's seduction of her victim is more about infidelity in this version and sexual repression rather than being about a theft of innocence like it is in the original. Also, the original story is more about the forbidden desire between Laura and Carmilla, this desire that's never acted upon. Lenore chooses to act on her desire, so she has a bit more agency in this one. So this version of the story is explicitly queer. The two characters do get together, while the sapphic elements in the original version are only implied. They're only really subtextual. Although it does take a very long time to get to that point. Carmilla and Lenore don't act upon their forbidden desire until like maybe 70% of the way through the book. And up until that, I kind of found it boring. I thought it was very slow moving. I don't know if this was because the book was trying to imitate Victorian literature, so they were just like spending so much time describing like this falling apart mansion, describing what the moors were like. I caught myself kind of skimming through those sections being like, okay, when does the gay stuff happen? Like, when is this actually going to pick up? When are we going to see blood? When are we going to have evidence of vampires? There's a lot of like repetitive sections about Lenore's childhood trauma, about her like losing her parents and being raised by her aunt who was abusive to her. And I found those sections to be like, they were interesting the first time, but they kind of kept coming up and just kept retelling the same stories over again. And I don't think this book was a debut, but it kind of read like one. I was getting to the point where I was like, okay, like, where are we going with this? When are we going to move forward? There's also this whole subplot about Henry, about the husband being a horrible manager at his steelworks. His employees are getting like fingers cut off and body injuries, and like some of them are even dying, and he is not compensating them or their families. So there's this whole drama about like corruption and capitalism and whatever, which feels a bit like kind of a stretch to make that a side plot in the story that's supposed to be a retelling of Carmilla. I did not think there was any real purpose to these side plots aside from trying to make us hate Henry even more, which was already very easy to do because he was a terrible husband. And the critique of capitalism that she was trying to do felt a little bit out of place. So I had some critiques about that. A lot of the characters are a little bit one-dimensional, including Lenore and Carmilla at times, although those two definitely had the most captivating dialogue and tension between them over all the other characters. So, like I said earlier, while the writing definitely captures that like moody gothic vibe of the moors of Victorian England, I did find myself kind of skimming through a lot of the subplots to get to the juicier stuff. So it was a little bit boring at times. But I did find the relationship between Carmilla and Lenore really fascinating, much more so than the relationships between the other characters in the book. It is important to note that I did read an arc, so some of my personal critiques with the writing specifically might get edited in the final publication of the book. So I definitely recommend, especially if you like Victorian literature, you check it out anyway. Even if the boring bits are still a little bit boring, it was a fun reading experience because I did really love the original Carmilla, but I wanted so much for it to be gayer, so it was really fun. So I really do thank Kat Dunn for giving me the sapphic feminist revenge story that Carmilla always had the potential to be. I did enjoy that bit. So if you enjoy Gothic Victorian literature, if you like brooding in the moors, if you like blood or gore or lesbians or bloody lesbians, any of those kinds of things, female rage, anything like that, then you would probably enjoy Hungerstone, which is going to be out February 13th. And with that, we have just one retelling left. Sadie, I think I know your favorite Shakespeare play, but can you share with the rest of us what your favorite Shakespeare play is?
I can. So, similar to Virginia, my favorite is the Scottish play. And yes, as an actor, I still struggle to say the name out loud, even though we are not in a theater. But it is, I don't know what about that play, but I have always absolutely loved it, even though it is probably one of his bloodier shows, which does not usually translate to my tastes in modern media. But there's just something about that show. I've performed in it a couple of times, and it's a really fun show. I think that with his tragedies in general, they can be really fun to be in because of how dramatic they are. I remember that the difference between a Shakespearean tragedy and a Shakespearean comedy is that a tragedy ends in death and a comedy ends in a wedding, but kind of all of the stuff in between can be shifted and can be changed. And so I think that the tragedies can actually be a lot of fun. So that being said, I have spent a lot of my life reading and analyzing and performing Shakespeare, both from an English background and a theater background. My first performance was when I was a tween, where me, my sister, and our two friends did a truly masterful rendition of Much Ado About Nothing, performed for our parents in my friend's living room, where my friend played both Beatrice and Benedict. Let's just say hilarity ensued. Oh, yes, it was very brilliant. Now, I've traveled to England to perform Shakespeare adaptations. I have seen the work of the bard performed in his birthplace and also with a crumbling castle ruin as a backdrop. I've traveled to the States specifically for the purpose of going to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashland. And every year during middle school and high school, I would travel with my school to be part of the Shakespeare Festival in the Okanagan in Summerland, performing traditional Shakespearean plays, modern adaptations, and doing workshops where we learned to juggle or where we were only allowed to speak in iambic pentameter. I have seen and read some truly wonderful and some truly terrible adaptations, some that have stayed very true to the original, some that have twisted things so much that it was hardly recognizable anymore. I would say that in general, I am a Shakespeare fan, not just because it has been forced upon me as a theater student, but because I think that I do truly enjoy some of the work, but also only because I've seen it done well, and I think I can appreciate kind of what it takes to do it well. Now, all that being said, I had no idea what I wanted to do for this week's episode. Since I have not read a lot of other classics, Shakespeare was the way to go for me. It makes the most sense, just because at least I would know my source material. As I said, my favorite is the Scottish play, but most of the adaptations for that tend to go into the horror genre, which is not my favorite. So after some searching around, I decided to go with an adaptation of a play that I know quite well. I've seen it performed on multiple occasions. I've studied it in English lit classes. It has been adapted so many times, from traditional performances to satirical plays based on two of its lesser known characters to an animated Disney movie featuring lions. The title role has been played by Kenneth Branagh, Mel Gibson, Richard Burton, and Benedict Cumberbatch, and many, many others. It is, of course, Corinne's favorite, Hamlet. And this is The King of Infinite Space by Lyndsay Faye. Leah Brahms is in Ben's dream again. She knows it's his dream and not hers. She's not quite sure how, but she does. Maybe because she doesn't think that even in her worst nightmares, she would ever come back to this place. She's never really sure when she'll end up in Ben's dreams, his nightmares, but it always happens again, eventually. This time, they're in the burned out husk of the Old World Theater in Midtown Manhattan, a place in which Leah spent most of her childhood, a place that is automatically nightmarish to her, and a place that burned down 20 years ago. Ben is here, of course. He always is. It's his dream. This time, he wears the body of his younger self, a child of 8 years old, wearing ripped jeans and a red t-shirt, his face battered and bruised. This was a normal look for 8-year-old Ben, Leah remembered. Ben was often bullied at that age. Unique, eccentric, incredibly smart, and the son of millionaire and Broadway mogul Jackson Dane, his peers decided he was better used as a punching bag than to actually spend the time to get to know him. Leah knew him, though. At least she knew him before. Before Leah and Ben had fallen in love. Before Ben had proposed and Leah had said yes. And long before Leah ruined it all and she lost Ben forever. Now every few weeks, Leah is drawn against her will into Ben's nightmares, where she has to endure his manic philosophies and looks of love and adoration. Looks that she knows will never lead to anything but more heartbreak. This dream is different, though. This time, Leah leaves. She's never tried to leave before, though she can't say why. She flees through the burned-out theater, down the stairs, and into the lobby. She pauses to see the oil portraits on the wall. Jackson Dane, founder of the Old and New World Theater and Ben's father. Trudy Dane, Ben's mother. And Claude Dane, Ben's uncle. She pauses as she notices the portrait of Jackson Dane has started to decay. No, not decay, to combust. It burns right in front of her eyes. And when Leah looks back to see that Ben has followed her into the lobby, in that moment, she knows. She can't say how or why, but she knows that she is going to have to tell Ben that his father is dead. Now, Benjamin Dane, at the best of times, has been different. Even after the therapists and the medication, even after his time spent at Columbia, where he maybe started to come into his own, even after finding and losing the love of his life, Benjamin struggles through life. It's not that he's had any big reasons to struggle. He's the son of a millionaire, has wanted for pretty much nothing his entire life. He's classically handsome and nice. He really is a nice guy, even though at times he struggles to think of others. Some might call him selfish. Oftentimes, he thinks of nothing but others. He spent his whole life trying to make his father proud, and knowing that he was always falling just a little bit short. But now, his father is gone. Overdosed on depression medication is what the official report is saying. But not only that, not only is Ben trying to come to terms with no longer having Jackson Dane in his life, but his mother, Trudy, has, mere months after the death, remarried to none other than his father's own brother, Claude. The marriage happened in private. Even Ben wasn't there, not that he would have wanted to be. And now the man who was once his uncle is his stepfather. The whole thing is just weird. And Ben has no one. Horatio is gone. Leah is gone. Everyone is gone. And Ben doesn't know if he can get through this on his own. When Horatio Ramesh Patel fled New York and returned home to London a year earlier, he really didn't think he would ever hear from Benjamin Dane again. The two used to be inseparable, best friends and roommates from the first moment they met at Columbia. Ben, Horatio, and usually Leah were together all the time. Even after everything that happened with Leah and Ben, Horatio was there. He stayed by Ben's side. Ben was his best friend and the love of his life. However, it was very clear that even after everything that happened, Ben would always love Leah. But then, after what can only be described as the biggest mistake of his life, Horatio knew he couldn't stay in New York anymore. So he returned home without saying goodbye and has kept himself busy with work ever since. But then he got the text. So I know you're busy. You always are now, but get here, please. I think I'm losing my mind. How could he not go? Horatio knew about Ben's dad's death. He even knew about his mother's new marriage. But with the way he left Ben the year before, Horatio didn't think he would be a welcome addition to Ben's life. It seems he was wrong. So he boards the cross-Atlantic flight to return to New York. He's seated next to a man who introduces himself as Robin and says that he's an event planner by trade, a man who makes Horatio very uncomfortable, even more so when he tells Horatio that he can sense that Horatio is something called bloodsick and that the lives of people who are bloodsick never turn out very well. Now, Horatio, having no bloody clue what this man is going on about, is more than happy to get off the plane at JFK to find Ben waiting for him. A thoughtful gesture that Horatio never really expected from his best friend. Horatio knows that they will have to talk about that night at some point. The night when everything changed. But at this moment, the focus needs to be on Ben and the spiral that he's very quickly falling into. A spiral that is made worse when Claude drops off a box of Ben's father's items from his office at the theater. A box that contains a video of Jackson Dane pleading for someone to help him, claiming that his life is in danger and that his brother Claude is trying to kill him. Ben, Horatio, Leah, along with Claude and Trudy, Leah's father Paul, the three florists that Leah works for, and event planner Robin will come together at the New World Theater's gala for a night that will not easily be forgotten, to determine what happened to Jackson Dane, what will happen to Benjamin Dane, and who will be left standing at the end of it all. So as Corinne pointed out, this book and this story is a mystery. It's a crime thriller with Ben and Jackson Dane at the center. A cold case coming back to haunt a family who never knew that they were involved in it. It is a story steeped in magical realism with Leah, Robin, and the three florists leading the way. It is a romance with the love between Leah and Ben and Horatio, and Claude and Trudy and Paul being the driving force. If you know the story of Hamlet, then you know this story. It is honestly a pretty traditional adaptation, apart from it being set in modern-day New York and not 15th century Denmark. Most of the players are there: Hamlet, Ophelia, Horatio, Gertrude, Claudius, and Polonius. Even Rosencrantz and Guildenstern make an appearance as Ben's horrible friends from college, the Marlowe twins. Everything that you expect to play out in a Hamlet adaptation does. However, I will say that you may still be surprised by how the story ends. Lyndsay Faye knows her source material extremely well. She plays with the well-known story and builds on it and the characters. Hamlet, or Ben, is often portrayed as extremely selfish, a young man who feigns mental illness to try to throw people off. Faye gives him nuance and empathy in a way that I don't think the original text allows for. She explores the very real mental health issues of young people in today's world. She expands the part of Leah, giving her a perspective and a voice and a life which is not seen in the original. She builds on Ophelia's obsession with flowers and plants and turns her ramblings into important information that Leah has to learn as her job as a florist's assistant. She also uses this character to address how a person may respond to trauma in their life and the devastating reality of addiction. She provides Horatio with more to his story than just the best friend, than just the one who survives to tell the tale. She gives him thoughts and feelings and mistakes and heartbreaks and centers the story quite a bit around him, way more than the original does. She uses her knowledge of other Shakespeare plays, such as The Tempest, Macbeth, I will say it, and A Midsummer Night's Dream, to add additional characters to the story and give it an otherworldly feel, which works to further twist the reader's expectations of the traditional story. So this book is not one that I would usually pick up. It does have the magical realism aspects, but it is much more literary than I usually read. And I think that if not for this episode, I probably never would have picked it up. However, I think that what drew me into this book was the fact that I listened to the audiobook. Shakespeare is meant to be performed. That is how it was written. That is how it is meant to be seen and heard. And I can say about the audiobook is the narrators performed it so well. There's Michael Crouch, who was Ben, Imani Jade Powers as Leah, and Raj Ghatak as Horatio, and they just did a beautiful job of narration and performance. Now, I alluded to this a couple weeks ago, but this is the first book that I have maybe ever read where as soon as I was done listening to it, I wanted to immediately listen to it again. The book was laugh out loud funny at times, beautiful, romantic, heart-pounding, and heartbreaking. I honestly think that this is how Shakespeare adaptations should be done, even though it stayed very true to the original story. If you're looking for something that kind of twists your thoughts a little bit in expectations, but also keeps you grounded in the classic story of Hamlet, something that would make you cry or laugh or scream, then I highly recommend The King of Infinite Space by Lyndsay Faye.
Thank you so much, Sadie. I really appreciate you bringing your theater background to your interpretation of Shakespeare. As you were going through all your personal experiences with Shakespeare growing up, I was like, oh, I'm so glad Sadie's going last because we're going to end on such a great little, I feel like we got just like the perfect theater actor's perspective. And that sounded like a really, really fun book. So I really appreciate you bringing that. So thank you to all of my book friends for bringing your wonderful adaptations today, whether it was a Shakespeare adaptation or another literary adaptation. And I hope that listening to these stories about stories, inspired some of our listeners to check out either some retellings of different literary classics or maybe revisit those literary classics themselves and get a feel for the original stories. And with that, I think that's all we have for today. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time for another episode of Keep It Fictional.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.